So let's jump right in. Our work here at Utah Clean Energy, we're a nonprofit focusing on addressing the most important challenge of our time, which is addressing climate change. And we're really focused on 4 different areas: working to transform our homes and buildings to be emission-free, energy efficient, cost-effective. Electrifying our transportation fleet, which is going to have enormous benefits, especially for us here in Utah, as well as modernizing our electricity system to be clean and innovative. And we'll talk, that's the subject that we're talking today about. And then also, encouraging political leadership in the state to really accelerate this transition and take advantage of all the opportunities that exist in this transition. So I wanted to start first and talk about Utah Clean Energy's priorities for the electric system. We really need our electricity system to serve us, to serve the long-term public interest. And the way we look at this is, when we think about this kind of interlocking priorities, is we need our energy system to be affordable, reliable, and clean. And these are really interdependent objectives. If you don't have a reliable system, then it doesn't matter how much it costs. It's just not there when you need it. Similarly, it has to be affordable in order, if you can't afford it, then it's not reliable.
Support the marketing.
And then clean is also an important component of this, because if the electricity system isn't clean, then all of a sudden some of those external costs like air pollution and impacts on our climate can affect the affordability. I mean, that's a cost that's imposed on society. Similarly, we can see that and we'll talk a little bit about this, some of the climate disruptions that we're starting to see in the electricity system are affecting the reliability of our system. And so really, these 3 priorities are all really important, and we need kind of all of them to be objectives, and we need to pursue all of them together. For those of you who don't know, just wanted to provide a brief introduction, an overview about our utility, Rocky Mountain Power. It's a subsidiary of PacifiCorp, which is in turn owned by Berkshire Hathaway. Rocky Mountain Power here in Utah serves about 81% of Utah electricity customers. The other folks are served by electric co-ops and municipal utilities. And you can see on the map the full footprint of PacifiCorp that operates in 6 different states, from California, Oregon, and Washington to a little bit in Idaho and Wyoming. And the biggest footprint for PacifiCorp is actually in Utah. So it's taking a step back and thinking about the big picture. Regulated monopolies are really, there's this grand bargain that kind of governs how they operate. They provide the affordable, reliable, and clean electricity and power to customers who need it. And in exchange, they get a reasonable return on investment. And that's how we've been operating for about 100 years. And the way that rates are changed is the utility has to go to the Utah Public Service Commission and seek approval of changes in rates, and that's what we're talking about today, and that's what's going on. So the Public Service Commission is the regulatory entity which oversees Rocky Mountain Power here in Utah. So the big news was that end of June, Rocky Mountain Power proposed a really significant rate increase. It's about a 30% increase in residential rates, going from almost 11 cents per kilowatt hour to about 14.3 cents per kilowatt hour. That on top of that per kilowatt hour increase, there's also increases in the fixed customer charges, kind of the base amount you pay just to be connected to the grid. They pay every month. It's going from $10 to $15 for single family homes. And it's also increasing for multifamily homes as well. all told, this is going to increase a typical household's electricity bill by about $24 per month. And this is a really significant increase. Over the last decade or so, electricity rates really haven't changed that much. And so to have a 30% increase is a really big difference from where we have been in the past. There's an important update in this proposal, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I want to take a little bit closer look about how the initial proposal was intended to take place. It was intended to increase rates in actually two steps. So the first step here was going to happen in February 23rd, 2025, and residential rates were going to increase by 17.6%. And then after that, almost a year later, on January 1st, 2026, rates were going to increase further 11.1%. So there is this two-step increase in the rate structure. And just a reminder that rate percent doesn't include the customer charge. So there's a few other things beyond just this rate increase that are actually important. But the rate increase is the big one. So, and again, I mentioned there's an important update, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's look at, what's driving this really large increase in rates right now after such a long time when rates have been really stable. And for this, I really want to just point to Rocky Mountain Power's filing with the Public Service Commission, because it's actually really illustrative what they say about why their rates are going up. And I think it explains it fairly well. It's really dense and complex, but if you know where to look, you can find the key pieces. So first of all, the largest driver of net power costs, and net power costs are just all of the costs to produce and deliver power to all the customers. So this is the majority of costs. The largest driver of net power costs in this rate case is regional power and fuel costs. And on the right, you can actually see this is an excerpt from the actual filing to the Public Service Commission. And on the left is kind of my little short summary of that. And then in addition to that, climate change is posing financial risk, and you can see, this is the language that the public or that Rocky Mountain Power is using. This orange part, the financial risk posed by the increasing frequency and severity of wildfires, which is due to climate change. They talk about that in the rate case, is driving up costs for the utility, and they're seeking recovery of those costs from ratepayers. So really, climate change is an important driver of the costs that we're seeing in this rate case. I should also mention, if you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll loop back at the end, and we'll have some time for discussion and to answer questions. So let's take one more step deeper. What is driving these increasing fuel costs for us? And really, it comes down to fragile fossil fuel supply chains that are being disrupted by a number of factors, and they're all kind of being concentrated and affecting Utah right now. So the first really big factor was Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which drove up natural gas prices globally, but also here in Utah and kind of regionally. So that was a major disruption to the global energy markets. The second major factor was a couple of years ago, the Lila Canyon coal mine caught fire, and that actually is a really important coal mine here in Utah. And that single coal mine was providing about 25% of Utah's coal production. And so when that mine caught on fire, overnight that coal supply was eliminated, right at a time when we also had this other disruption from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so we were really short on power. And that has resulted in coal prices really increasing really dramatically. And in the rate case, they talk about kind of future prices, but a lot of those details are redacted because there's confidential information. in the rate case, but you can go to the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, and you can look at historic prices. And so that's what's shown in this figure here. This is the average price of coal delivered to the Hunter coal plant, which is one of the major coal plants here in Utah. And you can see that over the last decade or so, we've been averaging around $40 a ton for coal. But then after the Lila Canyon coal mine caught on fire, and we've had this energy crunch, you can see that new contracts for coal and so are increasing dramatically. And so what's shown on here, the gray dots are individual prices per ton for each individual of the sources. Each of these coal plants get their coal from a variety of different sources, and that blue line is the weighted average price of all of the coal that they've received. And so you can see that in 2023, we're already seeing these increasing prices. Coal prices on average were 41% higher than they were in 2022. And some of the most expensive coal that is being delivered is actually almost 2.5 times higher than the previous prices. So really spiking coal prices. And we expect that these coal supply issues will persist in the future. And the filing talks about some of the issues that coal mines are facing. They have this big long list of issues that are facing, issues with mining and geologic formations, issues with permitting, issues securing trucking and rail transportation for the coal, issues securing equipment, mining equipment that will be used in the mines, and also limitations in availability of financing, which has put some of the coal mines at an increased risk of becoming insolvent. So really serious challenges facing this industry. And as we're going through this transition, it's really lumpy, and that's going to present all kinds of costs, and it increases risks. We also see that climate change itself is driving up costs, and this is happening in a number of different ways. And this is just one of the excerpts from the rate case that provides a little bit of a summary. We see that heat waves are driving up net power costs because they increase peak power prices. We're also seeing that increased temperatures and changes in precipitation is causing drought conditions, which reduces our hydrological generation availability. Hydro is some of the cheapest power out there. And so when you have less of that, you have to get something else to replace it that's more expensive. So that contributes to rising costs. And we're also seeing winter storms that are affected by climate change. These more severe cyclones disrupt natural gas infrastructure. We've seen that in Texas and other places. The one that affected us, affected our utility, was in the winter of 2022. There was a big winter storm that knocked out a natural gas storage depot that temporarily took offline a lot of natural gas ability, and so it was quite disruptive. And of course, the really big one about how climate change is affecting our electricity rates is in wildfires. And there's a number of different ways that wildfires are having impacts on our utility. And the most clear one, affecting our utility and then therefore affecting our rates. The most clear issue is wildfire insurance and liability. And we're seeing that show up in a number of different areas. But also addressing wildfires is actually really important for the utility in order to maintain reliability. So there's a number of activities that they're engaging in that they have been doing for years, but now that we're entering a new climate system with warmer temperatures and riskier wildfire conditions, we really have to step up these efforts to address these risks of an electric system. So those include system hardening and upgrades, burying power lines, more vigilant vegetation management, a whole lot of monitoring, temperature monitoring, but also looking at how much the power lines are sagging, and using drones and et cetera. Lots of monitoring going on, installing weather stations, and there's a lot more that it's really being ramped up, and it's quite expensive, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And this is, what's in the actual rate case. Those are some things that are actually in the rate case, but we're expecting to see even more impacts coming, such as, we're already seeing, outside of the rate case, we're seeing impacts on credit ratings and borrowing costs, which affect investment decisions. And this is, actually quite ironic that climate change is affecting the system and driving up borrowing costs and changing investment decisions right at the time we need to be making those investments to reduce our carbon emissions to address climate change. So it's a really legitimately tricky situation. And we also see that wildfire insurance premiums are increasing quite significantly. And Pacific Core is also facing significant wildfire liability for wildfires in Oregon. Now, it remains to be seen if and how those will affect us here in Utah. It's still in the early stages of that process, but that's something that we're going to be watching very closely. So, taking a step back, fossil fuels and climate change are driving up rates. Is there anything in this rate case that is actually mitigating the rate increase and saving us some money? Turns out there is, and again, going back to the filing, the largest mitigating factor is our investment in zero fuel cost wind and transmission resources. And that's really important. Our investment in wind facilities is saving us, that's producing power, and so that's reducing our need for fuel costs. And fuel costs are the main driving factor that's increasing prices. As much as we can save on fuel costs, we're saving money. Costs are further mitigated by our utility participating in regional markets. And so they've highlighted the Western Energy Imbalance Market. And this is where our utility has gotten together with all of the other utilities across the West, and we can trade power back and forth at very fine temporal scales, and really you can buy whatever the cheapest power is. And often the cheapest power is renewable energy. And so it's increasing our utilization of renewable energy, but it's also saving us a lot of money because we're able to not spin up the natural gas or the coal resources that require these really high fuel costs. And they actually quantify the benefits for these fuel costs on our rates, and they talk about how wind facilities that have marginal costs of $0 per megawatt hour, which just means they're zero fuel cost facilities, have driven net power costs down by $93 million. So our investment in wind and transmission is saving us quite a significant amount of money in terms of how it would affect our rates. So now let's go and talk about the most recent update to the rate proposal. There's been some news covering this, and the headline, kind of the high level understanding of it, is Rocky Mountain Power has lowered their rate increase proposal to 18.1% instead of the 30.5%. That is really great news, right? This is like, we should all be really excited about getting, having a lower rate increase. But the details really matter here, and so it's worth digging in and figuring out what's actually going on. In the proposal, if you remember, there was this two-step structure. And what Rocky Mountain Power was planning to do was, they were going to start in February 2023 or February 23rd, 2025 with the first step, and then have a second step in 2026. And what they were planning to do is they said, here are our new net power costs. And in this first step of the rate increase, we're going to increase our rates to be about halfway up to the new net power costs. And then the second step, we're going to go all the way up so that we're, meeting our new net power costs and we're recovering all of the costs that we're experiencing. So this update essentially gets rid of that second step. And instead, there's just one step. And so that's why the proposal now is for 18.1%. Now, that first step is slightly different. It's not the last one in the first step was 17.6 for residential customers, and now it's 18.1. The reason for that, there was a slight change. Rocky Mountain Power projected what their insurance costs would be. And then since their initial proposal, they've now gotten some concrete bids back, and the insurance costs are a little bit higher than they expected. And so that's why that increased percentage is a little bit higher. So wait a second, though. Does that mean that Rocky Mountain Power is just somehow not going to be collecting their full net power costs? Are they not going to be made whole? That sounds a little bit suspicious, or perhaps very generous. Well, it turns out that their plan is still to recover those costs. And here's the key part of it. The company is this first part in the yellow just explains there's still going to be increase in that power cost to the midpoint in that first step. But this amended application says that they're going to remove the second step in 2026, but they're going to continue to recover the difference between the net power costs and the actual net power costs through the energy balancing account, the EBA. So wait, what does that mean? So this requires a little bit more of an explanation. The energy balancing account is a way for the utility to kind of true up their costs. In their rate case, they say this is how much our costs are, but then if costs are a little bit higher or lower, they can kind of have a correction year by year and make sure that if their costs are higher or lower. The energy balancing account is a separate regulatory process from the rate case. So they both go through the Public Service Commission, but they're determined in different times at different places. And so I'm showing, and I just wanted to show you all where you can see where the energy balancing account actually shows up. It actually shows up right on your bill as a line item. And so this is a picture of my bill, my electricity bill from July. And the energy balancing account changed or was updated on July 1st of this year. And so because my bill was from mid-July, so half of it was in June and half of it was in July. And you can see over here how the cost per unit of energy has more than doubled in the energy balancing account. And so just to illustrate this, the energy balancing account is right here. The rest of these costs, all of these other things that are in your bill, those are determined in the rate case. And so, but there's two different processes there. And if you go on the Public Service Commission's website, they have kind of this long table looking at how electricity rates have changed over time. And you can see that this most recent one on July 1st, the energy balancing account, the utility requested $450 million and they received $430. The commission approved $430 million for these fuel costs. And the energy balancing account is really driven by fuel costs. And it increased our electricity rates by about 10%, is kind of the take-home point from the energy balancing account. So the bottom line here, the initial rate increase proposal was for 30% increase in rates in 2 steps. And then they just filed this amended application that gets rid of this second step, which is 11%, that they were going to account for the full net power costs. They've dropped that, but our rates just went up 10% in July due to this energy balancing account where they're planning to true up the net power costs. So really, we're facing an overall rate increase of about 28% by next March. So yes, things changed, but this is complicated, and there's two different regulatory buckets where they're collecting costs, and maybe we're still not making that much. It's really not that much different. So taking a step back, this really illustrates why diversifying our electricity mix is really important for protecting Utah against rising costs. Fuel costs are rising, and we're going to pay those costs regardless of whether they come in the rate case or the energy balancing account. These are real costs to the utility. And so we have to remember, though, that clean energy sources such as wind, solar, and geothermal have zero fuel costs. They're zero fuel cost resources. And so they're not subject to these volatile price changes, subject to global factors and local factors, from supply chain challenges, fires, global conflicts, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. That's why clean energy can help us ensure stable energy prices for customers. And we really need to get back on track with adopting more of this as we move forward. So it's maybe a little bit repetitive, but I'm just going to phrase this another way. It's key take-home points. Fuel prices and climate change are driving up our electricity costs. That's the primary driver. These zero fuel cost resources, and such as wind, solar, and geothermal, and our participation in regional markets, having people around us that can help leverage these fuel cost resources, not only save us money, but they're also reducing emissions, supporting a healthier climate and healthier communities. Building new clean energy resources and new transmission and storage. This is a no regrets path for Utah's future. As we're moving forward, this is what we can really leverage for finding a productive way forward. And especially in the near future, we should be building a whole lot of this stuff because it's economically competitive. And lastly, we need your voice at Utah's energy policy table. I encourage you to talk to your family and friends and coworkers and networks. Help them understand that our rates are going up substantially, and we're all in this together. Also encourage you to talk to your state representatives. These are folks the state policy can affect all of these things in the state legislature oversees the Public Service Commission and can affect policies that either can hold back clean energy or can really pave the way for more energy adoption and smooth the way. Also encourage folks, if you're interested, to submit your own comments to Utah's Public Service Commission. They take public comments about this rate case and the other rate cases or forums that are presented to that regulatory body. Also reach out to letters to the editor and other folks in your networks. And that kind of wraps up the bulk of the presentation. Thanks for your attention, and I'd be happy to stick around and answer questions. There's our contact information on this slide. Can always reach out to any of us. Sarah Puzo's a regulatory associate who's really digging into the legal aspects of this rate case and understands all of the ins and outs there. And Josh Kraft is our Director of Government Relations and is working closely with the state legislature and key stakeholders in the state to help understand what's going on. So thank you all for your attention, and I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Logan. Very nice job as always. So I've been tracking a few of your questions throughout the chat, and I think let's start with, we have several questions just dealing with straight up questions about the rate increase. First one from Dan. He's referencing specifically Schedule 6 customers, so the large energy consumers. He's asking, it sounds like their rates are not being raised as much as residential. Do you know, Logan, has Rocky Mountain Power or the industry overall given any rationale for what might be considered favorable treatment for the larger energy consumers? Logan, you're muted. Sorry.
That is probably a longer conversation. The rates vary over time, and you're always trying to find what's the cost of service for serving specific customer classes. And large customers are a special class because they use larger amounts of power and can be more consistent, but they also sometimes have more flexibility. So the nuances of that rate design, it is part of this rate case, but those things vary over time. So maybe that would be a better conversation to have offline to dig into some of those details.
Okay, fair enough. So then Lisa asks, you talk about the mitigating factor of clean energy. Lisa asked, does Rocky Mountain Power in their filing at all acknowledge the new renewable assets needed to meet the Community Renewable Energy Act?
Not in this rate case. So this rate case is designed to look at one specific year. So they're looking at the year 2025. And they're looking at the amount of money that they would have to spend to serve load in 2025. So it's called a test year. And then they're designing rates so that they can recover their costs in that year. The Community Renewable Energy Program, that's not going to go into effect until 2030. And so there's still a run up, and where those costs will be is going to be determined in a separate forum in front of the Public Service Commission. And we hope to see that starting to move forward actually pretty soon, this fall, hopefully. But those costs will be in a different spot, or the discussion of that program will be in a different spot. It's not explicitly included in this rate case.
So that actually leads me to an interesting question from Jeremy, related, but I would assume not necessarily in the Community Renewable Energies Act. So he's asking, you reference zero fuel cost resources, and by that we mean solar, wind, geothermal, correct, Logan?
Yep.
So he's asking, how do you think about the capital costs of zero fuel cost resources and how this will change our power rates in the future?
Yeah, I mean, they're not free currently, although solar is quite inexpensive. And so there are capital costs. You have to invest money, and then if you can get financing, you can pay for those over the life of the asset. So you can kind of think about the levelized cost of resources. So I actually have an extra slide on this. The Lazard puts out their analysis of the levelized cost of energy, which is once you account for all of the different costs, fuel, connection, building, construction, et cetera, you get to the levelized cost of energy. And so this is where you can compare, and this is looking over the last 15 years or so, and you can see that solar, utility scale solar, and wind are some of the cheapest resources that we have available to us here. And this is looking at the country, so it's not specific to Utah. But here in Utah, we have excellent solar resource, some of the best in the country. And so our solar costs are actually quite low as well. So that's one way to think about all of the costs coming in together. You do have to pay up front, but then, especially when you have rate or fuel cost increases, having more of these zero fuel resources as part of your mix really buffers you against these volatile energy prices. And so, like I said, that's been really important. It's going to be really important as we've seen disruptions in the coal supply chain. that has been incredibly important after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That the majority of that, the worst impact of that was on Europe. And across Europe, if you looked at different countries in Europe, the countries that had the most solar and wind installed were the most buffered from that huge increase in prices. And so this is why we talk about diversifying. Right now, where we're at today is we need to diversify our energy mix, not have all of our eggs in one basket. And that's going to provide a buffer against volatile energy prices.
So Logan, I'm going to ask you to keep this slide up because I think it's relevant to this next question. Jeremy asked if you can comment on Rocky Mountain Power's assessment of net costs of natural gas and the dip, this is in the question, and the dip in natural gas prices we've seen recently.
Yeah, so natural gas prices went up quite extraordinarily for a couple of years, and now they're back down. So this is this volatile nature. We're in a boom and bust cycle now. There's been a lot of scale up of natural gas production. But the costs that we're paying now are for the past couple of years when those prices went really high. And now we're seeing prices that are actually quite low and potentially causing some problems for the natural gas industry. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some liquidity issues with some of the natural gas extraction companies just because the prices are so low. So in the end, those prices are going to go up and down, and we expect them over time, in the forecast over time, over long periods of time, to just continue to go up. But again, we're on a roller coaster. As much as we've hitched our wagon to these resources, we're on this roller coaster, and we're not buffered against these external factors. And we're kind of like our destiny. We're not in control of our destiny. Our destiny is up to a dictator in Russia, or folks in the Middle East, conflicts in the Middle East that there are conflicts in the Middle East right now, and if those were to bubble up, we could be in another energy crisis. And so taking our destiny in our own hands, producing power locally that's consumed locally, really ensures that we have a secure, reliable, and affordable and predictable energy prices going forward.
So then I'm going to combine two questions. David asks, investing in wind energy was specifically mentioned as the #1 mitigating factor to cost increases. He's asking, why was solar not included, if you know? And that is actually kind of goes in with Greg's question, which was asking how far along Rocky Mountain Power is in its commitments to their 2023 IRP. They may not be as related as I think, but
yeah. So with regards to the first question, the big emphasis was on wind because there's new wind facilities that are coming online in 2024, the end of this year, and in 2025. And so for this specific test period that they're looking at, there's new costs associated with these wind facilities and transmission lines. And so there's this major benefit. And so they were really focusing on the wind because it's just coming online right now. But of course, there are solar plants that have been coming online and also contribute to this. But that's why there was a specific focus on the wind facilities, because they're just brand new.
Got it. So as that relates to the IRP, you kind of mentioned that. So is there any update on the 2023 IRP that was originally planned and its relationship?
Yeah, so so in a separate process, PacifiCorp, the 6-state utility, every 2 years comes up with an integrated resource plan, IRP, and that kind of charts their path forward for the next 20 or 30 years. And the 2023 IRP, when it came out, it showed a really dramatic increase in deployment of wind and solar. and batteries and storage for in the next few years. We were really excited about it. And then a number of things happened in the year after they released that. Issues with wildfires, issues with changes in federal regulations, and some legal wrangling over federal regulations. But you add all that together, and the updates are every 2 years they have an IRP, and then in between years they have an IRP update. And so the update, the 2023 IRP update, actually showed a big revision in the deployment of wind and solar and batteries. And so, but now we're in the process of the next iteration. We're in the process of the 2025 IRP. So there are meetings every month or two, looking at all of the fundamentals. PacifiCorp is in the process right now of locking down all of the economic data. So they update all of the economics of all the different resources. So I expect to see these higher coal costs, as well as lower solar and wind, but especially batteries have really declined in cost really substantially in the last 2 years. And we're also starting to see geothermal come online and some really exciting developments in that area here in Utah. And so all of those new costs will go into the 2025 IRP. And I'm really curious to see how that pans out. And we're also going to be advocating for incorporating some of the climate impacts and costs to the utility into our decision-making process, because of course the emissions from these fossil fuel resources are contributing to climate change, which are now imposing real costs to the utility.
Excellent. Thank you, Logan. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. We've got time for a few more. I'm going to keep on the mitigating factors for a little bit longer. And so there's an interesting question about wouldn't Rocky Mountain Power find greater benefit in focusing on energy storage or batteries to smooth energy production and consumption curves? Why are they not doing this?
Yep. They are planning to build out a number of battery storage projects. There are a number that are in the works, that are coming online in the near term. So they are looking at it, and a lot of it is being driven by costs of batteries and how those batteries can be used on the system. But it's interesting because the IRP update showed us really substantial decrease in the amount of batteries they're planning to build out. I really expect that to change in the future, because batteries have decreased 50% in cost in the last couple of years. And so and we're seeing an enormous amount of batteries get deployed in places like California and Texas, and they're really changing how our grid is operated. So thinking at a fundamental level, this is truly innovation at its best, changing how we do things, how things operate, and making better use of our resources. So it's a really exciting and dynamic time right now in terms of the technologies that are being deployed and how our grid's operation is changing. So I would say they're doing some now, and I'm looking forward to this 2025 IRP, and I'm really hopeful that we'll see kind of an acknowledgement that we need to be doing actually a lot more, and it's really going to be cost effective.
Excellent, thank you. So then Ian asks, this might be just above your pay scale, Logan, but we're going to try. But he asks, do you know what the profit Rocky Mountain Power gets annually and how that compares with the costs to build more renewable generation?
They have their rate of return that's negotiated in this rate case is 9.65%. And so I don't have the specific numbers of how that would compare to the level of investment, but that is their rate of return as a regulated monopoly, and that specific percentage is something that's negotiated with the Public Service Commission, and so different utilities are, a lot of utilities are right around there, and so. But it is within the purview of the Public Service Commission to say, hey, you guys, you're not doing a good job, or whatever, and you're going to get a little bit lower rate of return, or maybe you're doing a great job and you deserve a higher rate of return. But that's where that is determined.
Yeah. All right, Nick kicked things off with an interesting question. Again, I'm not sure if we have this information, but I'd love to pose it to you, Logan. Do you know if the Public Service Commission has looked at any structural changes to incentivize Rocky Mountain Power to consider non-capital investment improvements? Nick references things like virtual power plants, transmission reconductoring, things like that.
There's that. Those conversations are happening in a bunch of different places, not necessarily in the rate case, but within the IRP process, in those public input meetings that they hold every couple of months. That's an opportunity to ask them to look into specific ideas and technologies. There's also DSM, a demand side management steering committee, where they look at some of those technologies that can help the grid be more innovative and flexible, and there's also opportunities. I feel like transmission right now, and especially the grid enhancing technologies, is an important area to be looking at, because it's a way that we could incorporate more resources on the grid with our existing grid, and it looks like PacifiCorp is actually doing quite a lot there, but a lot of it is quite technical in nature, and there's not great high level summaries, and so there's conversations about how to work with utility to make sure that the stakeholders are getting the right information, that we know that they're making, evaluating all of the best ideas that are out there, and it's hard to be able to help them if you need an electrical engineer, transmission engineer, in order to provide actionable feedback. And so that's one area that we're actively working on right now, to try to be able to provide better information and have more transparency into that transmission planning and procurement and upgrade process, because there's a significant opportunity there.
Great. So I have two more questions for you, Logan, and then we'll wrap. And this is a question this is a topic that comes up a lot in our work. Utah is growing constantly. And with that, our electricity needs are growing. That includes the growing popularity of electric vehicles and chargers. Do you know if Rocky Mountain Power has the reserves, which will be needed in the next 5 to 10 years, to expand the grid to meet this growing energy demand?
So that is an interesting conversation, and there's a lot there, and we're seeing increased demand from society. We're growing as a state, and we're also seeing increasing amounts of electrification from our vehicles to our homes. That is really good, and we're in support of. We're also seeing new requests for large energy users like data centers, that would be a substantial increase, and there's some, I would say, ambiguity about how real some of those requests are. Some of them seem like a little bit of vaporware, and we might be in kind of a hype cycle where it seems like there's a lot of requests, but when you really actually look at who's actually making investments and putting money down and actually making real plans, it might actually be much lower than we expect. But this is a real problem. We need to be building new resources, expanding the amount of energy that we can provide. And that's why we really need to be leveraging innovation, all of the good ideas, all of the new technologies that are coming online. We need a smarter grid that's being operated with a utility that's really looking at the best interests of society and really trying to find innovative solutions, because it's a real challenge, and it's something that we're actively working on. And we need all of the best ideas in that conversation.
So that leads me to the last question. Aaron and Art ask a really good question. You make a really good case in the presentation today, Logan. Clearly, we need to diversify our energy grid to meet growing energy demand, to mitigate against volatile fuel prices. In your opinion, if diversification is the strategy, then why isn't Rocky Mountain Power accelerating those acquisitions?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a really legitimately challenging situation and dynamic situation that we're in right now. Rocky Mountain Power they're facing challenges because of their wildfire liability in Oregon, or Pacificor is, and Rocky Mountain Power subsidiary. And that's their credit rating has been downgraded, and so they're facing borrowing costs, and there are different policy pushes and pulls right now. Right now, different states are pulling in different directions, and we're not all pulling in the same direction, trying to find common solutions that can move us forward. So that's really challenging to navigate, and so in that space, there's kind of there's been a pause, and really since the last, I don't know, 6-9 months, Rocky Mountain Power has really put a pause on their plans to build out new resources, and really that's frankly just not going to serve Utah's interests long term. Maybe a short pause is okay as we figure out what to do next, but there are really important opportunities that we need to be seizing right now. The rest of the industry, all of the utilities around us are growing really fast, seizing the opportunity, taking advantage of the investments and the tax credits that are available. So that we really need to shift gears into an opportunity mindset. And we need to get policymakers in the state and the utility to recognize that there's enormous opportunity right now. We can't just be sitting on our laurels and hitting a pause button for an indeterminate amount of time. So that's work that we're doing. We're trying to make that case with policymakers, with utility and key stakeholders in the state. But it's important for those folks to also hear from you, because the more they can hear it from different sources and different perspectives, the more they're going to listen to it, and they're going to say, hey, this is really a big issue. And 30% increase in our electricity rates, and this is a massive sea change. For the last decade, we've had basically constant rates. So there's a lot of learning and getting up to speed our policymakers need to do to understand what's behind what's driving these rates, and that will then inform where we're going to go in the future, and what the opportunities are, and how we need to work together to find common solutions. And we really need all perspectives in this debate and finding solutions. That's really key. We can't just have one side of the aisle or one set of perspectives. We can't have echo chambers for policymakers and our utility. We need folks with different opinions to be contributing to this discussion, because we need everybody's best ideas to navigate the choppy waters that we're already seeing and we see in the very near future.
Well said. Well, that is all of our time today. So I want to thank Dr. Logan Mitchell for all of his incredible work and continued analysis of this really vital issue that's going to impact many, many Utahns. Please sign up for Utah Clean Energy's newsletter if you haven't already. We post regularly updates on all things clean energy and climate. And with that, I'll thank everybody for attending once again today, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Logan. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.